Hey guys, what's up? Another video, and today we're doing something a little bit different. Now, I know when I say another video, I'm David from David's channel 777. I decided to do something new, and we're going to be reading for the blind. We're doing Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which is my favorite book. I have started reading it this year, and we might not get through the first chapter because I'm doing an introduction and I got apple cider and it's hard to resist that. But yeah, well, let's start. And I do not own this book. The writer of this book is J.K. Rowling, and I do not own this book or any of the characters. So, Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was director of a firm. Was a director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big beefy man with hardly any neck. I don't know what that was, but with hardly any neck. Although he did have a very large mustache. Mr. Dursley was thin. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde, and nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much time over her craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley. In their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it anymore. They could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter and Mrs. Dursley's sister, but that basically it was just weirdly worded. It basically means they're sisters, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were in un-Dursley-ish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they never had seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on a dull gray Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious thing that was happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, Mrs. Dursley gossiping away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny owl fluttered past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. "Little tyke," chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got in his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street he had noticed the first sign, something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive. But there wasn't a map in sight. Could you not, Charlotte? Could you not? I'm trying to do something. Sorry about the interruption. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. And Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and rode up. He watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No looking at the sign. No looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove toward town, he thought nothing except the large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of the drills were driven out of his mind by something else. He sat in the usual morning traffic jam. He couldn't help but notice that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes. The get-ups you saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quiet close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and was wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him! But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later Mr. Dursley arrived in the grunting parking lot, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past broad daylight through people down the street. They pointed and gazed mouthed as the owl after owl sped overhead. Okay, that is going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. This will be a new series on this YouTube channel. This is the first video of the YouTube channel, but I will be reading shorter books for younger kids. This is like a 5th grade level book. This is my favorite book, so this is why I chose this one. And make sure to check out my other YouTube channel, David's Channel 777. It is the first one with the grumpy cat wearing sunglasses. See you guys later. Goodbye.